A 4-year-old beggar girl gets her last piece of bread kicked away and cries from hunger. But a millionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The afternoon sun beat down on the uneven cobblestones of Elm Street in the historic district of Savannah, Georgia, when Isabel felt her tiny fingers loosen around the last piece of bread she had managed to earn that day. The 4-year-old girl, who looked only 2 due to her extreme fragility, had been sitting on the sidewalk for over 3 hours, watching people rush by while her stomach emitted desperate hunger pangs. Her clothes, a faded pink dress that had once belonged to another child, hung loosely on her small, thin body. Her tangled, dirty brown hair partially covered her angelic face, where 2 large, dark eyes shone with a sadness far too profound for her age. Isabel held that piece of bread as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, because she knew it might be her only meal that day. Across the street, Jason Sterling adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his silver BMW. At 30 years old, the entrepreneur had the looks of a movie star, with his perfectly styled dark hair, piercing green eyes, and an athletic build that drew attention wherever he went. His fortune, accumulated through smart investments in the stock market and a tech company he had founded while still young, made him one of the wealthiest men in Georgia. Jason checked the gold Rolex on his wrist. He was late for an important meeting with Japanese investors who wanted to invest capital in his company. His steps quickened on the historic stones, his mind already focused on the numbers and projections he would present. At that moment, a businessman with a black briefcase ran frantically across the opposite sidewalk, talking loudly on his cell phone about a deal that had gone wrong. The man, completely absorbed in his conversation, didn't notice the small figure sitting near the wall of the old Victorian house. His hurried steps led him directly toward Isabel, and without realizing it, his foot forcefully kicked the piece of bread from the girl's delicate hands, sending it rolling across the dirty gutter until it disappeared down a storm drain. The cry of despair that came from Isabel's throat echoed through the historic streets like a lament that pierced the heart of anyone with even a shred of humanity. It wasn't just the crying of a disgruntled child, but the pure sound of the suffering of someone who had just lost their only hope of satiating the hunger that had consumed her for days. Jason stopped immediately. His green eyes turned to the source of that agonizing sound, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something clench in his chest. There, across the street, a tiny child was crying in a way he had never witnessed. These weren't tears of tantrum or caprice, but of true despair. The businessman completely forgot about the meeting, the Japanese investors, and the millions of dollars at stake. He crossed the street in large strides, ignoring the cars honking angrily, until he knelt before Isabel. Up close, the situation was even more shocking. The girl was visibly malnourished, her arms as thin as dry twigs, and her clothes exuded the characteristic odor of someone who had nowhere to wash properly. "What happened, little one?" Jason asked in a soft voice that contrasted with his intimidating appearance as a powerful man. Isabel raised her eyes, swollen from crying, and pointed to the storm drain where her bread had disappeared. Her words came out in broken sobs. My food. Gone." Jason's heart broke upon hearing that fragile voice. Without hesitation, he took his wallet from his inside jacket pocket and pulled out some bills. But when he looked again at Isabel, he realized that money wouldn't be enough to solve what he was seeing. This child needed much more than a few coins. She needed care, protection, and above all, love. "What's your name?" he asked, sitting on the sidewalk beside her, not caring about the expensive suit he might get dirty. "Isabel," she murmured, wiping her nose with the back of her dirty hand. "Isabel, when was the last time you ate a real meal?" The girl thought for a moment, as if trying to remember something very distant. "I don't know. A long time ago." At that moment, Jason Sterling, The man who controlled million-dollar assets and decided the future of hundreds of employees, made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't simply give her a few coins and move on, pretending he hadn't witnessed that suffering. "How about you come with me? I can give you food, a hot bath, and a safe place to sleep tonight," he offered, already knowing that he was getting himself into something much more complex than he imagined. Isabel looked at him distrustfully. At 4 years old, she had already learned that not all adults were trustworthy. But there was something in the green eyes of that elegant man that reassured her, a sincerity she rarely saw. "Do you promise you won't hurt me?" she asked in a voice so small it was almost lost in the noise of the traffic. "I promise," Jason replied, extending his hand to her, "and I also promise that you will never go to sleep hungry again." It was a promise he didn't know if he could keep, but it came from the depths of his soul. As Isabel hesitantly placed her dirty little hand in his, Jason didn't imagine that that moment would change not only the girl's life, but would trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of his own existence. The Sterling mansion stood majestically in Savannah's upscale neighborhood, with its impeccably manicured gardens and architecture that blended southern charm with modern touches. Isabel held Jason's hand tightly as they walked through the main entrance, her eyes wide with awe at so much opulence. She had never seen such a large house. In fact, it was bigger than the whole block where she used to beg. Vanessa Sterling was in the living room, flipping through a decorating magazine, when she heard the sound of the key in the lock. At 28 years old, she possessed a refined beauty that drew attention in any social setting. Her always perfect blonde hair, impeccable nails, and designer clothes made up the image of a woman who had never known hardship. But behind that polished appearance, she hid a soul tormented by the loss she had suffered 2 years before. "Jason, you're home early today," she said, rising gracefully from the Italian leather sofa. But her expression changed completely when she saw the small, dirty figure next to her husband. "What? Who is this child?" The tension in the air was immediate. Isabel instinctively hid behind Jason's legs, feeling a strange energy emanating from that elegant woman. There was something in Vanessa's gaze that frightened her, a coldness that contrasted sharply with the kindness that Jason had shown. "Vanessa, this is Isabel," Jason explained carefully, noticing his wife's shocked expression. "I found her on the street. She was starving. I brought her home temporarily until we can find a suitable solution for her." "Temporarily?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. "You brought a beggar into our house without even consulting me." Isabel felt the words like slaps in the face. She knew she was poor, that her clothes were dirty, and that she didn't belong in that world of marble and crystal. But hearing someone talk about her like that, as if she were less than human, made her eyes fill with tears again. "Val, she's just a child," Jason said, his voice carrying a warning tone. "A child who was starving in front of us." Before Vanessa could respond, a middle-aged woman appeared in the doorway. Marlene Davis, 55, had been the family's housekeeper for over 2 decades. She had taken care of Jason himself when he was little, after his parents' traumatic separation, and had developed a maternal instinct that had never left her. "Mr. Sterling," she said in her warm voice, but stopped abruptly when she saw Isabel. Her experienced eyes immediately grasped the situation: a clearly malnourished and frightened child, a determined boss, and a visibly disgruntled mistress. Goodness gracious, what a little angel. Marlene knelt down in front of Isabel, completely ignoring the tension between the couple. "Hi, honey. You must be very hungry, aren't you? How about I make you a nice little snack?" For the first time since entering the house, Isabel showed something resembling a smile. There was a sincerity in that lady's voice that reassured her, similar to what she had felt with Jason. "Marlene, prepare a room for her upstairs," Jason ordered, "and see if we have any clothes that will fit her." "Of course, sir. I'll take care of everything," the housekeeper replied, extending her hand to Isabel. "Come with me, little one." We'll give you a warm bath and put on some clean clothes." As Marlene led Isabel upstairs, Vanessa waited until they were out of earshot to explode. "You've completely lost your mind, Jason. We can't just adopt a child from the street." "I'm not adopting anyone," he replied, loosening his tie with abrupt gestures. "I'm just offering temporary help until we find her family or a suitable institution." "Family?" Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Look at the state of her. If she has a family, they obviously don't care. And you want to bring that kind of problem into our house?" Jason stopped unbuttoning his shirt and stared at his wife fixedly. "What kind of problem, Vanessa? A starving child is a problem for you." "Don't be naive," she exploded, pacing back and forth across the room. "You don't know anything about her, where she came from, if she has any diseases, if she's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Jason's voice was full of disbelief. "She's 4 years old and weighs less than a bag of rice." But Vanessa wasn't listening. In her mind, that child represented much more than a simple act of charity. She represented a threat to her carefully laid plans to rebuild the family she had lost. 2 years ago, she had suffered a miscarriage in her 7th month of pregnancy, losing the child she so desperately wanted. Since then, she had been trying to get pregnant again, consulting the best specialists, taking hormones, and living each month in the hope of a pregnancy that stubbornly refused to come. "You don't understand," she murmured, sinking into the sofa. "We're trying to have our own child. What will people say if they find out you brought a beggar to live with us?" Jason watched his wife for a long moment. He knew her pain, understood her anguish over denied motherhood, but couldn't understand how she could be so cold to an innocent child. Upstairs, Marlene was helping Isabel take a bath. The hot water was a luxury the girl hadn't experienced in months, and she stood motionless in the tub, just feeling the warmth enveloping her thin little body. "Do you have a family, honey?" Marlene asked gently, shampooing the child's tangled hair. Isabel was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether she could trust that lady. "I have Mommy," she said finally, in an almost whispered voice. "And where is your mommy?" "At the hospital. She got very sick, and the doctors said she needed to stay there." Isabel's eyes filled with tears again. "But I was scared. There were people screaming in the hallways, and Mommy didn't wake up when I called her. So I ran." Marlene felt her heart clench. "How long ago was this, darling?" "Many days. I can't count very well." The housekeeper finished bathing the girl in silence, processing that information. Isabel wasn't an orphan. She had a mother who was probably desperately looking for her. That changed everything. When they went downstairs for dinner, Isabel was unrecognizable. Clean and wearing one of the dresses that Marlene had managed to adjust, she looked like a normal child, although still visibly malnourished. She sat at the enormous dining room table with wide eyes, watching the absurd amount of food that Marlene had prepared. Vanessa watched her in silence, noticing how the girl's eyes sparkled at the sight of so much abundance. There was something in that child's innocence that bothered her deeply, a purity that contrasted with her own heart, full of bitterness and envy. "Jason," Vanessa said suddenly, making everyone look at her, "I need to talk to you. Alone." After Marlene took Isabel to the room prepared for her, the couple locked themselves in the study. Vanessa was visibly agitated, pacing back and forth. "I can't do this," she said abruptly. "I can't pretend everything's okay with her here." "Why not?" Jason asked, genuinely confused. Vanessa stopped pacing and stared at him with tears in her eyes. "Because every time I look at her, I remember our son that we lost. And I can't bear the idea of you becoming attached to her while I'm still trying to give you a real child." The revelation hit Jason like a punch. He hadn't realized the emotional connection his wife was making, nor how his impulsive decision to help Isabel could reopen wounds that hadn't yet healed. That night, as Jason struggled to find a solution that wouldn't hurt either his wife or the child he had promised to protect, Isabel slept in a real bed for the first time in months. But even in her dreams, she called for her mother, unaware that her presence in that house had unleashed an emotional storm that threatened to destroy everything around her. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the window of the room when Isabel woke up, momentarily confused by the luxurious surroundings. For a few seconds, she thought she was dreaming until reality returned. She really was in the house of that kind man who had saved her from hunger. Her first attempts to get up were shaky. Her still weak body was adjusting to the feeling of having slept in a soft bed. Marlene knocked gently on the door before entering, carrying a breakfast tray. Her maternal eyes immediately noticed how Isabel still looked lost in those surroundings. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" she asked, placing the tray on the small table beside the bed. "Good," Isabel whispered, but her eyes were fixed on the food. Fresh bread, fruit, orange juice, and even some sweets she had never seen before. "You can eat as much as you want," Marlene encouraged, "and then we'll take a walk in the gardens. How about that?" While Isabel ate with a delicacy that contrasted with her desperate hunger, downstairs the tension between the sterling couple was reaching a critical point. Vanessa had woken up with a fierce determination to make Jason change his mind about keeping the girl in the house. "You didn't sleep all night," she observed, noticing the deep circles under her husband's eyes. "Are you regretting the impulsive decision you made yesterday?" Jason was drinking coffee, standing up, looking out the kitchen window. His cryptocurrency investments had performed well overnight in the Asian market, but not even the increase in his net worth could distract him from the conflicts that Isabel had brought into his life. "It's not regret," he said carefully. "It's concern. For her, for you, for this whole situation." "Then you understand that she can't stay," Vanessa pressed, moving closer to him. "Jason, we're prominent people in this town. We have responsibilities, an image to maintain. We can't what? Be human," he interrupted, turning to face her. "Vanessa, that child was literally starving in front of us. And you did your part. You gave her food, a place to sleep. Now it's time to find the appropriate solution for her. A foster family, an institution, anything that isn't our permanent responsibility." At that moment, Marlene came down the stairs with Isabel beside her. The girl seemed a little stronger after a night's rest and a nutritious meal, but still maintained that fragility that touched the heart of anyone with even a shred of sensitivity. "Mr. Sterling," Marlene said, "the little one told me something important last night." Vanessa immediately became alert. Any information about the girl's past could be useful for her plans to remove her from the house as quickly as possible. "What was it, Marlene?" Jason asked, kneeling in front of Isabel. "Her mommy hasn't passed away like we thought," Marlene said carefully. "She's in the county hospital. The girl ran away from there because she was scared." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. If Isabel's mother was alive, that meant there was hope of reuniting the family. But it also meant that he had taken on an even greater responsibility than he imagined. "Which hospital?" he asked, already getting up. "The county one, sir. According to her, her mother was very sick, and the doctors said she would need to stay there for a long time." Vanessa saw a golden opportunity. "Perfect. Then we can take her back to where she belongs." Problem solved. But when they looked at Isabel, they saw that the girl had paled drastically. Her small hands were trembling, and she began to shake her head negatively. "I don't want to go back," she said in a voice so low they could barely hear her. "Please don't send me back there." "Why not, sweetheart?" Marlene asked gently, kneeling next to Jason. "It's too noisy there. People shout. And Mommy didn't wake up when I talked to her." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I called and called, but she didn't hear me. The doctors said bad things about her when they thought I wasn't listening." Jason felt a pang in his chest. A 4-year-old child had witnessed medical conversations that probably weren't appropriate for her ears, and that had scared her so much that she preferred to run away and live on the streets than stay in that environment. "What kind of things did they say?" he asked carefully. Isabel hesitated, as if trying to remember words she didn't fully understand. They said Mommy didn't have money for the expensive medicines, and that people like her, poor people, sometimes don't get better because they can't afford it. The revelation struck Jason like lightning. He knew the problems of the public healthcare system well, but he had never witnessed its consequences so directly and cruelly. A mother was possibly receiving inadequate treatment due to lack of financial resources, while her little daughter overheard conversations that made her lose hope. Vanessa, however, interpreted the situation completely differently. See, she has a mother. It's not our responsibility to solve the problems of the American healthcare system. We can donate some money to the treatment and leave a 4-year-old child alone in a hospital where she clearly feels abandoned and scared. Jason interrupted, his voice full of disbelief. It's not our problem, Vanessa exploded, completely losing her composure. We can't save all the poor children in the world. The shout echoed through the kitchen, and Isabel instinctively cowered, hiding behind Marlene. The housekeeper immediately wrapped the girl in her protective arms, casting a disapproving look at Vanessa. Mrs. Sterling, Marlene said with a firmness she rarely used with her employers, the child has already suffered enough. We don't need to add to her fear. Jason watched his wife with an expression she had never seen before. There was disappointment in his green eyes, a disappointment that hit her more deeply than any shouting could have done. I need to go to the hospital, he announced. I need to know exactly what her mother's situation is. And then? Vanessa asked, her voice now controlled but still laden with tension. Then we'll decide how to proceed. But one thing I can guarantee, I won't abandon this child while she needs help. Even if it means choosing a stranger over your own wife. The question came out of Vanessa's mouth before she could stop herself. Jason stopped at the kitchen door without turning to look at her. If helping an innocent child means choosing her over you, then maybe you need to rethink your priorities, Vanessa. After Jason left, the tension in the kitchen remained palpable. Vanessa watched Isabel with a mixture of resentment and something she couldn't quite identify. The girl represented everything she couldn't have, the innocence, the ability to awaken protective instincts in her husband, and above all, the presence of a child in the house that should only be occupied by her own son. Marlene, sensing the hostile environment, decided to take Isabel to the garden. Come on, honey. Let's see the flowers and the little birds outside. As they left, Vanessa was left alone in the luxurious kitchen, surrounded by imported appliances and Italian marble, but feeling emptier than ever. The presence of that child had exposed cracks in her marriage that she didn't know existed, and for the first time in 2 years, she wondered if her obsession with having her own child wasn't blinding her to other forms of love and compassion. In the garden, Isabel ran among the flowers, her childlike laughter echoing through the morning air. Marlene watched her with a smile, remembering when she had cared for Jason as a child. There was something special about that girl, a resilience that made her blossom even after so much suffering. Mrs. Davis, Isabel said, stopping running and looking at her seriously, is Mr. Sterling going to send me away? The question broke the housekeeper's heart. Why do you think that, honey? Because the pretty lady doesn't like me, and she's his wife. Marlene sighed deeply, knowing she couldn't lie to a child who had already learned to read the expressions and tensions of the adults around her. The county hospital of Savannah was crowded when Jason arrived. Its peeling walls and the strong smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with human sweat, creating an oppressive atmosphere. He had never set foot in that place before. His medical emergencies were always resolved in expensive private clinics where care was quick and discreet. The difference between the two worlds hit him like a slap in the face. At the reception desk, a tired employee attended him without even looking up from her paperwork. "Patient's name?" she asked mechanically. "Carmela. I don't know the last name," Jason admitted, realizing how little he knew about Isabel's family. She has a little daughter, 4 years old, named Isabel. The woman sighed and typed some information into the old computer. Carmela Oliveira, admitted 2 weeks ago to the pulmonology ward. But, sir, visiting hours are over. It's urgent, Jason insisted, discreetly placing a few bills on the counter. Her daughter is in my care, and I need to speak to the doctors in charge. The money disappeared quickly, and the receptionist became suddenly more helpful. Room 247, second floor. Dr. Carter should be making rounds now. The elevator was broken, forcing Jason to climb the poorly lit stairs. With each floor, the contrast with his privileged life became more evident. People slept in the hallways, entire families huddled in plastic chairs, and the constant noise of crying and loud conversations created the chaotic environment that had scared Isabel. Room 247 housed 6 beds, separated only by faded curtains. Carmela Oliveira was in the 3rd bed, a 24-year-old woman who looked 40 due to the suffering etched on her thin face. Her brown hair, similar to Isabel's, was dull and stuck to her sweaty scalp. She coughed constantly, a harsh sound that echoed through the room. "Carmela," Jason called softly, approaching the bed. She opened her eyes with difficulty, taking a few seconds to focus on the elegant man standing beside her bed. Who are you?" she asked in a hoarse and weak voice. "My name is Jason Sterling. Your daughter, Isabel, is at my house." The effect was immediate. Carmela tried to sit up, but was overcome by a coughing fit that left her breathless. "Isabel? My baby? Where was she? Is she okay? Please, tell me she's okay." Tears streamed down Carmela's face as she held Jason's arm with surprising strength for someone so debilitated. "I looked for her everywhere. When I woke up and didn't see her anymore, I thought something terrible had happened." "She's safe," Jason reassured her, touched by the woman's maternal despair. "Well-fed, clean, sleeping in a comfortable bed, but she ran away from here because she was scared." "I know," Carmela sobbed. "This place is a nightmare. The doctors talk like we're not people. They say awful things in front of her, as if a 4-year-old doesn't understand they're saying her mother might not get better." At that moment, a man in a white coat approached, consulting a clipboard. Dr. Carter was about 50 years old and had the tired expression of someone who dealt with more cases daily than he could adequately handle. "Sir?" he asked, looking at Jason curiously. "Sterling, Jason Sterling. I'm taking care of Mrs. Oliveira's daughter and would like to better understand her medical condition." The doctor raised his eyebrows upon hearing the surname. Everyone in Savannah knew the Sterlings and their fortune. "Mr. Sterling, the patient has severe bacterial pneumonia, complicated by chronic malnutrition and stress. The treatment is being done, but, Jason pressed. "But she would need more modern antibiotics, specific nutritional supplementation, and a less stressful environment to fully recover. Unfortunately, our resources are limited." "Limited how?" Dr. Carter looked around, ensuring there were no other employees nearby. "Mr. Sterling, I'll be frank. The patient has no health insurance, no way to pay for private treatment. We're doing what we can with what we have, but it's not ideal. If she had the financial means—" "She does now," Jason interrupted without hesitation. "I want her to receive the best treatment possible. Transfer her to a private hospital. Hire the best specialists. I'll cover all the costs." The doctor was speechless. "Mr. Sterling, that would cost tens of thousands of dollars." "I don't care about the amount," Jason said, taking his cell phone out of his pocket. "I'm going to call my lawyer right now to resolve the legal aspects." Carmela watched the conversation in disbelief. In her life of poverty and need, she had never met someone who could simply decide to spend a fortune to help a stranger. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this for me? For us?" Jason put his cell phone away and sat in the plastic chair beside the bed. "Because your daughter taught me something important yesterday. She taught me that there are things more valuable than all the investments I have in the stock market or all the cryptocurrencies I've accumulated. There are people who need help, and I'm able to help. But we're nothing to you. Yes, you are, he said with conviction. You are human beings, and that should be enough. While Jason resolved the formalities of Carmela's transfer, at the Sterling mansion a different scene unfolded. Vanessa watched Isabel play in the garden with Marlene, and for the first time really paid attention to the child. Isabel had found some colored pebbles and was arranging them in complex patterns on the grass. Her concentration was impressive for a 4-year-old, and there was something almost mathematical in the way she arranged the stones. She's smart, Marlene commented, joining Vanessa on the veranda. Very smart. Last night, when I was giving her a bath, she counted to 50 without any mistakes, and this morning she was humming a beautiful melody, said her mother taught it to her. Vanessa didn't respond, but something inside her stirred. Watching Isabel play for a brief moment, she didn't see a threat or a problem. She saw a child who could... No, she shook her head, pushing away dangerous thoughts. Mrs. Sterling, Marlene said carefully, can I say something? Sure. This girl has already suffered a lot. She lost her father when she was only 2 years old, saw her mother get sick, lived on the streets, went hungry. She doesn't deserve more suffering. I'm not making her suffer, Vanessa defended herself. I just think she should be with her own family. But what if her family can't take care of her properly? What if she needs people who are able to give her opportunities that her background would never allow? Marlene left the question in the air and went back inside the house, leaving Vanessa alone with her conflicting thoughts. The housekeeper had planted a seed that, without Vanessa realizing it, was beginning to germinate. That afternoon, when Jason returned from the hospital, he found a scene he didn't expect. Vanessa was sitting in the garden, watching Isabel draw with colored chalk on the stone pavement. They weren't interacting, but there wasn't the hostile tension of the morning either. "How's her mother?" Vanessa asked as he approached. "Very sick, but she's going to recover. I arranged for her transfer to a private hospital and the best treatment possible." "That must cost a fortune." "It will," Jason confirmed. "But I'm sure it's the right thing to do." Vanessa was silent for a moment, watching as Isabel drew a house with a family of 4 in front, a woman, a man, and 2 children holding hands. "She drew us," Vanessa murmured, without realizing she had said us. "She did," Jason confirmed, surprised by his wife's less hostile tone. It was at that moment that Isabel looked up and for the first time smiled directly at Vanessa. A small, hesitant, but genuine smile. And Vanessa felt something break inside her chest, a barrier that she herself had built. The following week brought subtle but significant changes in the dynamics of the Sterling household. Carmela had been transferred to St. Luke's Hospital, the most renowned in Atlanta, where she received intensive treatment that cost Jason over $80,000 in the first week alone. His assets in investment funds easily covered the expenses, but the emotional impact of seeing a family destroyed by poverty affected him more deeply than any financial loss. Isabel gradually adapted to the routine of the mansion. She woke up early, had breakfast with Marlene in the kitchen, played in the garden, and, surprisingly, had begun to approach Vanessa timidly. The most notable change was in Vanessa, who had gone from hostile to merely distant, observing the girl with a growing curiosity that she herself did not fully understand. It was on a sunny Thursday that the first significant twist occurred. Jason was in his office, analyzing reports of his investments in technology stocks, when Marlene knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Sterling, you need to come see something," she said, holding Isabel's hand. "The girl told me something important about how she lost her father." Jason saved the documents on the computer and turned to them. "What is it, Isabel?" The girl looked at Marlene for encouragement before speaking. "Daddy worked in a big factory. He made parts for cars, but one day the bosses said they were going to close everything because they didn't have any more money." "What factory was this?" Jason asked, an uncomfortable feeling beginning to form in his stomach. It was Isabel frowned, trying to remember. Mommy always said a difficult name, Metaltech something. Jason's blood ran cold. Metaltech Components had been a subsidiary of his company, specializing in automotive parts. 2 years ago, he had authorized the closure of the unit in Savannah after a restructuring that, according to his consultants, was necessary to maintain competitiveness in the market. 300 families had lost their jobs in that process. "Marlene," he said in a tense voice, "can you take Isabel to play in the garden? I need to make some calls." As soon as he was alone, Jason opened the Metaltech files on his computer. There it was, a list of all the employees laid off in March 2022. And in the middle of the names he found Roberto Oliveira, machine operator, 8 years with the company. Isabel's father. The discovery hit him like a hammer. Indirectly, his business decision had destroyed the girl's family. Roberto had lost his job, plunged into depression, started drinking, and eventually abandoned his wife and daughter. Carmela, without income and with a young child to care for, had developed health problems that culminated in the pneumonia that almost killed her. Jason sank into the leather chair, the weight of guilt crushing his shoulders. All his profits in Bitcoin, all his fortune accumulated through smart business decisions, all seemed dirty in light of that revelation. When Vanessa entered the office an hour later, she found her husband with his head in his hands, surrounded by papers scattered across the table. "What happened?" she asked, immediately noticing his anguish. "I destroyed her family," he said without looking up. "I'm the one who caused this whole tragedy." Vanessa listened to the explanation in growing silence. When Jason finished telling her about the connection between Metaltech and Isabel's family, she remained quiet for a long moment. "So that's why," she murmured finally. "That's why what?" "That's why you feel so responsible for her. It's not just compassion, it's guilt." Jason finally raised his eyes to face his wife. "And you think that makes my feeling less valid?" "I think it makes it more complicated," she replied honestly. "Because now you're going to want to compensate for something that can't be undone, and that can lead us to decisions that we might not otherwise make." That night during dinner, Isabel noticed the tension between the couple. She had learned to read the moods of the adults around her, a skill developed during months living on the streets. "Is Uncle Jason sad?" she asked innocently, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted for him. "A little," he admitted. "Sometimes adults get sad when they find out they did bad things without knowing it." "What kind of bad things?" Jason looked at Vanessa, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Remember when you told me about your daddy losing his job at the factory?" "I remember. I was the owner of that factory. I was the one who decided to close it." Isabel processed the information with the seriousness that only children can demonstrate in the face of important revelations. "So you're the one who made my daddy go away?" "Not directly, but yes, my decisions made your father lose his job." To everyone's surprise, Isabel got down from the chair, went around the table, and hugged Jason's legs. "It's okay, Uncle Jason. You didn't know you were going to hurt my family, and now you're taking care of me and Mommy." The simplicity of the childish forgiveness made Jason's eyes fill with tears. Vanessa watched the scene, feeling something strange moving in her heart, a mixture of jealousy, admiration, and something she couldn't name. 2 days later, a second twist shook the Sterling household. Marlene was cleaning the guest room where Isabel slept when she found the girl sitting on the floor, organizing small objects in complex mathematical patterns. "What are you doing, honey?" she asked. "I'm counting," Isabel replied naturally. "If I take 3 pebbles and multiply by 4, it's 12, and if I divide 12 by 2, it's 6. Marlene stopped making the bed. "Who taught you to multiply and divide?" "Nobody. I see the numbers in my head and know how they work." The housekeeper called Jason immediately. When he arrived at the room, Isabel demonstrated her mathematical ability by doing calculations that children her age shouldn't be able to solve. Not only that, she had created a complex melody that she hummed while playing, also showing exceptional musical talent. "This isn't normal," Jason said to Vanessa that night. "A 4-year-old shouldn't have this ability." "She's a prodigy," Vanessa agreed, and for the first time her voice carried something like maternal pride. "Imagine what she could become with proper education, specialized teachers. Exactly what I was thinking." It was at that moment that Vanessa realized what had happened. Without realizing it, she had begun to think of Isabel not as an intruder or a threat, but as a child with extraordinary potential who could be shaped and developed. For the first time in 2 years, she was considering the possibility of channeling her maternal instincts into a real child, instead of continuing to dream of a biological child that stubbornly refused to come. The following week, Carmela was discharged from the hospital. Her recovery had been remarkable. The state-of-the-art antibiotics and proper nutrition had restored her health impressively. But when she arrived at the Sterling mansion to pick up Isabel, she didn't find the same fragile and scared child she had left behind. Isabel ran to hug her mother, but there was something different in her movements, in her posture, even in her vocabulary. 3 weeks of good food, medical care, and intellectual stimulation had transformed the girl into someone unrecognizable. "Mommy, look what I learned!" Isabel said excitedly, showing a complex drawing she had made. "Aunt Vanessa gave me new crayons, and Uncle Jason said I can start taking music lessons." Carmela looked at the drawing, a family portrait where she appeared next to Jason, Vanessa, and Isabel, all smiling in front of the mansion, and felt her heart break. Her daughter had found a family, a life that she could never offer. "Isabel," she said carefully, "it's time for us to go home." The smile disappeared from the girl's face. "But Mommy, I like it here. And Uncle Jason said he's going to enroll me in a special school for smart kids." Carmela looked at Jason and Vanessa, who were watching the scene in tense silence. You want to keep her?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode, because everyone knew that the answer would change their lives forever. The silence that followed Carmela's question was charged with an almost palpable tension. Jason and Vanessa looked at each other, each processing the implications of that moment. Isabel, sensing the gravity of the situation, clung to Vanessa's leg, a gesture that surprised everyone, especially Vanessa herself. "Carmela," Jason said carefully, "you just got out of the hospital. Maybe it's best if we talk about this more calmly when you're fully recovered." "No," Carmela replied, with a determination that contrasted with her still fragile appearance. "I need to know now. My daughter has spent 3 weeks here, enough time for me to see that you can give her everything I never could." Marlene, who was watching the scene from across the room, approached discreetly. In her 55 years of life, she had witnessed many delicate situations, but none had touched her heart like that one. "Mommy," Isabel said in her small voice, "why can't you stay here too? The house is very big." The innocence of the question made Carmela's eyes fill with tears. "Because this isn't our place, my baby. We're simple people, and they're important people." "But I like them," Isabel protested, "and they like me." Vanessa felt something break inside her chest upon hearing those words. For 3 weeks, she had struggled against her own feelings, trying to keep her distance from the girl. But little by little, Isabel had broken down all her defenses, awakening maternal instincts that she thought existed only for a biological child. "Carmela," Vanessa said softly, surprising even herself, "what if there was a way for you not to have to choose between what's best for Isabel and keeping her with you?" "What do you mean?" Carmela asked, wiping away the tears. "You could work here. Marlene is getting older and has always talked about needing help. You could be our second housekeeper, live here with us. That way, Isabel would have access to the education and opportunities we can offer, but she would still be with you." Jason looked at his wife with surprise and admiration. That was a solution he hadn't considered, And it revealed a Vanessa he didn't know, a woman capable of putting a child's well-being above her own insecurities. "You would do that?" Carmela asked, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You would let me work here, even knowing that I'm just a poor woman with no formal education?" "Carmela," Jason said, "after everything that happened, everything my company did to your family, it would be the least we could do." Marlene approached and took Carmela's hand. "Honey, I would raise this girl as if she were my own granddaughter, but nothing would replace the love of a mother. If you agree to stay, Isabel would have the best of both worlds." Isabel looked from one adult to another, trying to understand if that meant she could stay in the beautiful house without losing her mother. "Does that mean we're all going to live together?" she asked. "If your mother agrees," Vanessa replied, kneeling to be at the girl's height. "Would you like that?" "A lot," Isabel exclaimed, hugging Vanessa with a force that deeply moved the woman. Carmela watched the interaction between her daughter and Vanessa, and for the first time realized that the woman's initial resistance had transformed into something resembling genuine maternal love. "I accept," she said finally, "but with one condition." "What?" Jason asked. "I want to work for real. I don't want to be treated as a favor or a charity case. I want to earn my own money and have my dignity." "Of course," Jason agreed immediately. "You'll receive a fair salary for your work." That night, after organizing the practical details of the new situation, Jason locked himself in his office to process everything that had happened. In less than a month, his life had changed completely. He had spent over $100,000 on medical treatment, was about to take responsibility for two people who had until then been strangers, and even more impressively, had seen his wife transform from a bitter woman into someone capable of unconditional love. Vanessa entered the office without knocking, something she rarely did. "Are you regretting it?" she asked directly. "Regretting what?" "All of this. Bringing her home, changing our whole life." Jason leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before answering. "You know what's funny? For years, I've accumulated wealth, invested in stocks, bought bitcoins, built a fortune that would give me security for several lifetimes. But until I met Isabel, I had never felt that my life had a true purpose. And now it does. Now I understand that all the money in the world is worthless if you don't have someone to protect and care for." Vanessa approached and sat on the arm of the chair. "You know what impresses me the most? How she changed me. I spent 2 years hating the world for not being able to get pregnant, blaming you, blaming myself. And then this girl appears and teaches me that being a mother doesn't necessarily have to do with giving birth." "Do you feel like her mother?" "I do," Vanessa admitted, surprising herself with the ease of the confession. "When she hugged me today, I felt something I had never experienced before. And when I thought about the possibility of losing her to an institution or to an unknown adoptive family, I felt a despair that I never felt even for our plans to have biological children." 2 days later, when the new routines were being established, something happened that no one expected. Donald Silva, 67, the gardener of the neighboring Vasconcelos property, appeared at the gate of the Sterling mansion asking to speak with Carmela. Marlene received him with strangeness. "Donald, what do you want with our new employee?" The man, with grey hair and hands calloused by decades of manual labor, seemed nervous. "Marlene, I need to talk to her. It's about something very important." When Carmela came down to greet the visitor, her reaction was unexpected. She paled drastically, her legs trembled, and she had to lean against the wall. "Dad?" she whispered, using a word that visibly moved Donald. "Daughter," he replied, opening his arms. Carmela ran to hug him, crying like a child. I thought you had abandoned me forever." "I never abandoned you," Donald said, his voice choked with emotion. "I've worked next door all these years just to be able to be close to you, even from afar. Marlene watched the scene with growing confusion. "Can someone explain to me what's going on?" Carmela stepped away from her father's embrace, wiping away her tears. "Donald isn't my adoptive father, like I always knew. A few months ago, I discovered the truth. He's my biological father." The revelation struck everyone like lightning. Jason, who had arrived attracted by the noise, tried to process the information. "How so?" Marlene asked. "When I was 17, Donald explained with difficulty, "I got a girl from town pregnant. We were very young, very poor. She left soon after Carmela was born, leaving me alone with a baby I couldn't afford to raise. So you gave me up for adoption," Carmela completed, "to a family that I thought could give you a better life. But I never stopped loving you or thinking about you. When I found out that the adoptive family had gone through financial difficulties and that you were facing problems, I got this job nearby so I could follow your life from a distance." Isabel, who had come down attracted by the loud voices, watched the scene without fully understanding but realizing that something important was happening. "Who is he, Mommy?" she asked. Carmela knelt next to her daughter, still emotional. "He's your grandfather, honey. Your real grandfather." The discovery that Isabel had a living grandfather who had worked on the neighboring property for years, who knew the Sterling family by sight, added another layer of complexity to the already intricate situation. But it also brought something unexpected, the feeling that perhaps destiny had conspired to bring those people together. That night, when Donald left with the promise to return the next day to spend more time with the granddaughter he barely knew, Jason realized that his life had become a tangle of human connections that he could never have predicted or planned. The weeks that followed Carmela's reunion with her father brought a superficial stability to the Sterling mansion, but beneath that apparent calm, complex tensions began to simmer. Donald visited his granddaughter daily, bringing small gifts he made with his own hands: carved wooden birds, pressed flowers, small gardens in clay pots. Isabel was delighted with her newfound grandfather, but her emotional loyalty remained divided among so many adults who were now part of her life. Vanessa observed these interactions with conflicting feelings. On one hand, she was happy to see Isabel surrounded by love and attention. On the other, a part of her feared that all this biological family might eventually decide to take the girl away from the life they had built together. It was an irrational fear, since Carmela worked for them and Donald was just a humble gardener. But the protective instincts she had developed for Isabel did not follow logic. It was during one of these seemingly quiet days that Jason received a call that would change everything again. Marcus Reed, the regional director who had overseen the closure of Metaltech, was on the other end of the line with a tone of voice that immediately alerted Jason. "We need to talk in person," Marcus said, "and I suggest it be today." "About what?" Jason asked, although an unpleasant feeling was already forming in his stomach. "About your new family, and about certain decisions you've made recently that may affect a lot more people than you realize." The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon at the company office. Marcus Reed was a 45-year-old man, ambitious and calculating, who had always resented the fact that Jason, being younger, was his superior. When Jason arrived, he found Marcus sitting behind his desk with a stack of documents in front of him and an expression that mixed arrogance with something dangerous. "So," Marcus said without preamble, "you decided to play family man with a beggar." "Watch your words, Marcus," Jason warned, his voice full of contained threat. "Or what? Are you going to fire me like you did her father?" Marcus laughed cruelly. "Ah, yes, I know all about your unresolved guilt. You found out that the child you picked up on the street is the daughter of one of the employees we laid off, and now you want to compensate by throwing money at the problem. It's none of your business how I choose to help a family in need." "Oh, but it is," Marcus said, picking up one of the documents, "because your charitable decisions are drawing unwanted attention. Do you know how many other families were harmed by the closure of Metaltech? 300. And do you know what's going to happen when they find out you're paying for expensive medical treatment and giving employment to the family of just one of them? Jason began to understand where Marcus was going, and he didn't like what he was seeing at all. They're going to want to know why Roberto Oliveira was special, Marcus continued. They're going to investigate, ask inconvenient questions, and eventually someone will find out that the closure of Metaltech wasn't just a normal business decision. What are you talking about? Marcus smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm talking about the financial reports that I altered, about the contracts I directed to specific partner companies, about how I created the financial justification needed to close the unit. Jason's blood ran cold. You sabotaged Metaltech. I made smart business moves. The company was going to close anyway, sooner or later. I just accelerated the process and made sure some of the right people profited from it. People who, by chance, paid me very well for the services rendered. The revelation hit Jason like a punch to the stomach. The guilt he had carried for months, the feeling of being responsible for the destruction of Isabel's family, had all been manipulated by his own employee for personal gain. You're confessing to corruption and fraud, Jason said, trying to keep his voice controlled. I'm sharing information with my boss, Marcus corrected. Information that will remain confidential as long as certain conditions are met. What conditions? First, you're going to stop this charitable charade. You're going to find a foster family for the girl and distance yourself from all this drama. Second, you're going to promote me to CEO with corresponding salary and profit sharing. Third, you're never going to question my decisions or methods again. And if I refuse, then I'm going to leak to the press not only the details of the corruption, putting you as an accomplice, of course, but also a very interesting version of how a millionaire businessman is using a poor child to cleanse his conscience and improve his public image. Jason was silent for a long moment, processing the implications of the blackmail. Marcus wasn't just threatening his career or reputation, he was threatening to destroy the new family he had found. You have a week to decide, Marcus said, getting up from his chair. And Jason, if I were you, I wouldn't tell your new substitute family. It would be a shame if they found out that all this generosity started with your guilt over corrupt business decisions. When Jason returned home that night, he found a scene that made his heart ache even more. Isabel was in the garden with Donald, learning to plant flower seedlings, while Carmela and Marlene prepared dinner in the kitchen, talking and laughing like old friends. Vanessa watched everything from the veranda, a genuine smile on her face, something he hadn't seen in a long time. "How was your day?" she asked as he approached. "Complicated," he replied, trying to mask the anguish he felt. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jason looked at the family that had formed around him, a family built on his need for redemption, but which had now become something real and precious for everyone involved. Marcus's blackmail threatened to destroy all of that, but telling the truth could also have the same devastating effect. "It's nothing I can't handle," he lied, hating himself for not being able to be honest. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Jason stayed alone in his office, analyzing his options. His investments in international funds were performing well, his bitcoins had appreciated significantly, and his net worth continued to grow. From a financial point of view, he could easily meet Marcus's demands, but doing so would mean rewarding corruption, and worse, potentially putting other people at risk in the future. On the other hand, confronting Marcus meant exposing the whole family to a scandal that could destroy not only his reputation, but also traumatize Isabel again and possibly separate them all. It was then that he heard a soft noise in the hallway. Isabel was standing at the office door, barefoot and in pajamas, holding one of her wooden birds that Donald had carved for her. "Uncle Jason? Why aren't you sleeping?" "Sometimes adults stay awake thinking about difficult problems," he explained, trying to smile. What kind of problems? Jason hesitated. How to explain to a 4-year-old that bad people sometimes do bad things and then use those things to hurt good people? Problems about how to protect the people we love, he said finally. Isabel approached and climbed onto his lap, an intimacy that had developed naturally in recent weeks. My mom always said that when we have very big problems, we have to ask for help from the people who love us. The simplicity of the girl's observation hit him deeply. He had spent his entire life solving problems alone, using money and power to overcome obstacles. But now he had a family, people who cared about him not for his fortune, but for who he had become alongside them. "You're right, little one," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Sometimes we need help. So are you going to ask?" she asked, looking at him with those big, trusting eyes. "I am," he promised, making a decision that would change everything once again. The next morning, Jason gathered the whole family, Vanessa, Carmela, Marlene, and even Donald, for a conversation that he knew was necessary, even if painful. It was time to tell the truth about Marcus, about the blackmail, about all the complex threads that connected their lives. Because he had learned that a true family was built on honesty, not on secrets, even when the truth was hard to accept. The family meeting took place in the main room of the mansion, with everyone sitting in a circle that symbolically represented equality among them. Isabel played on the rug with her toys, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation that was about to happen. Jason looked at each face around him, these people who had become his true family, and took a deep breath before beginning. "There's something you all need to know," he said, his hands trembling slightly. "About my company, about the closure of Metal Tech, and about a situation that could threaten our family." Vanessa immediately became alert. "What kind of threat?" "Marcus Reed, my regional director, contacted me yesterday. He's blackmailing me." The silence that followed was dense. Carmela stopped folding the clothes she was organizing. Marlene put the coffee tray aside, and Donald raised his eyes from the newspaper he was pretending to read. "Blackmailing how?" Vanessa asked, her voice tense. Jason told everything, the discovery that Marcus had deliberately sabotaged Metal Tech through fraudulent contracts, diverting resources and creating the justification for the closure. He explained how his own guilt over the layoffs was, in fact, based on criminal actions by his subordinate. And finally, he revealed Marcus's demands: abandon Isabel or see the whole family destroyed by a public scandal. "This man is threatening our girl?" Marlene asked, her voice full of an outrage she rarely showed. "He's threatening all of us," Jason corrected. "If I don't give in to his demands, he's going to spread a distorted version of the facts that could seriously harm us." Carmela, who had remained quiet throughout the explanation, finally spoke up. "Mr. Sterling, you need to understand something. Isabel and I have already lost everything once. If we need to lose it again to protect you, we will." "No," Vanessa said firmly, surprising everyone. "We're not going to let this man destroy our family." "But Val," Jason began, "if this becomes public, then so be it," she interrupted. "Jason, 2 years ago I would have been horrified at the possibility of a scandal. My biggest concern was with appearances, with what others would think. But Isabel taught me that family is more important than reputation." Donald, who had listened to everything in silence, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but can I suggest something?" Everyone turned to the older man, whose life experience suddenly seemed valuable. "I've worked for a lot of important people over the years," he said slowly, "and one thing I've learned is that men like this Marcus always have secrets of their own. People who blackmail others usually have a lot to hide." "What are you suggesting?" Jason asked. "I'm suggesting that maybe we should investigate Mr. Reed's life before we surrender to his threats." It was Marlene who had the decisive idea. "Jason, do you remember Teresa? Teresa Andrade? Your niece who works in the auditing department?" "Exactly. She always said there were strange things in the reports that Marcus presented. If he really did what you said, there must be digital traces, documents, evidence." Jason felt a spark of hope. Do you think she would help us? I'm sure, Marlene said. Teresa is a good girl, honest. If she knows that someone is using fraudulent information to blackmail you and threaten a child, she'll want to help. But that could put her job at risk, Carmela protested. And staying silent will put Isabel's safety at risk, Vanessa retorted. I'd rather fight than surrender. That afternoon, Teresa Andrade met secretly with Jason at a discreet cafe in downtown Savannah. At 32 years old, she was a serious and competent woman who had always suspected Marcus's questionable operations, but had never had the courage to investigate further. I knew there was something wrong, she said after hearing the whole story. The numbers never quite added up, but Marcus always had convincing explanations for the discrepancies. Can you help us find concrete evidence? I can try. But if we find something, you're going to need to be prepared for the consequences. Marcus has important connections, and he won't accept being exposed passively. I'm prepared, Jason said. My family is worth any risk. Over the next 3 days, Teresa worked discreetly, accessing old files and cross-referencing information. What she discovered was even worse than they imagined. Marcus had not only defrauded Metaltech, he had a history of suspicious operations dating back years, involving several subsidiaries of the company. He embezzled over $2 million over the past 5 years, Teresa reported at a secret meeting at the Sterling Mansion. And it wasn't just at Metaltech. He has a sophisticated scheme of inflated contracts, phantom suppliers, and undeclared commissions. Is that enough to take him down? Vanessa asked. It's enough to put him in prison for years, Teresa replied. But you need to decide how you want to use this information. It was Isabel, who had overheard part of the conversation without the adults noticing, who asked the question that changed everyone's perspective. Uncle Jason, did the bad man also hurt other families like mine? The innocence of her question highlighted an ethical dimension that Jason hadn't fully considered. It wasn't just about protecting his own family, it was about delivering justice for all the families who had been hurt by Marcus's criminal actions. Yes, sweetie, he replied. He hurt a lot of families. Then we have to stop him from hurting more people, she said, with the simple logic of a child. That night, Jason made a decision he knew was irreversible. Instead of passively waiting for Marcus's next threat, he would counterattack. But not alone, with his family by his side. We're going to do this the right way, he announced at dinner. We're going to gather all the evidence, hand it over to the authorities, and let justice run its course. And if Marcus carries out his threats before then? Carmela asked, worried. Then we'll face it together, Vanessa said, taking the other woman's hand, like a real family. But what if people believe his lies about you? Carmela insisted. Carmela, Jason said gently, I've learned something important in the last few weeks. The people who really matter, who really know and love us, won't believe lies. And as for the other people, well, their opinions shouldn't define our happiness. It was Donald who summed up everyone's feelings. A united family can weather any storm. The next day, Jason scheduled a meeting with Marcus, but this time he wasn't alone. He had spent the night organizing all the evidence Teresa had collected, and for the first time in months, he felt truly in control. I thought you'd come alone, Marcus said when he saw Jason enter the office, accompanied by a lawyer and an independent accountant. Change of plans, Jason replied, placing a thick binder on the table. I want you to see this before we continue our conversation. Marcus opened the binder and his face gradually paled as he flipped through the documents. There was all the evidence of his fraud, records of suspicious transfers, altered contracts, compromising correspondence with fraudulent suppliers. How did you get this? He muttered, his earlier arrogance rapidly evaporating. The same way you got the information to blackmail me, Jason replied. The difference is that my information is true and verifiable. What do you want? Marcus asked, already knowing that the situation had changed drastically. I want you to resign immediately, return all the money you stole from the company, and disappear from our lives. In exchange, I won't hand this evidence over to the police. And if I refuse? Jason smiled for the first time in days. Then you'll find out what it really means to be in a vulnerable position. The war had ended before it even began. But the consequences of this victory would bring challenges that none of them could have foreseen. The victory over Marcus brought immediate relief, but also revealed the extent of the damage his fraud had caused. In the following weeks, Jason found himself forced to use a significant portion of his fortune to compensate the families who had been hurt by the fraudulent closure of Metaltech. His investments in international funds were liquidated, part of his gold investments had to be sold, and even his profits from bitcoins were directed to an indemnity fund. "It's almost $4 million, the accountant said during a meeting in the office, "if you really want to compensate all the families adequately." Jason looked out the window of his office, watching the traffic on the street. $4 million represented a considerable portion of his net worth, but it was the price of justice. "Do it," he said without hesitation. "All the families deserve to be compensated for what they've been through." Vanessa, who was present at the meeting, took his hand. "Are you sure? This will significantly affect our standard of living." "Our standard of living is worthless if it's built on the suffering of other people," he replied. "Besides, we still have enough to live comfortably and give Isabel the education she deserves." At the old Victorian house, the new family dynamic continued to solidify. Isabel had completely adapted to her mother's constant presence, but maintained special bonds with each adult around her. With Mrs. Davis, she learned to bake cookies and listen to old stories. With Donald, she discovered the secrets of the garden and developed a deep love for nature. With Jason, she explored her mathematical talent through games and complex puzzles. And with Vanessa, she had developed a maternal relationship that surprised everyone with its depth. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that news arrived that no one expected. Carmela was in the kitchen when she received a call that left her visibly shaken. "It was from the hospital," she said, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "About Roberto, about Isabel's father." Jason and Vanessa, who were in the living room, approached immediately. "What happened?" Vanessa asked. "He's alive," Carmela said, barely able to believe her own words. "He was in a rehab clinic in Atlanta. He found out I'm living here and wants to see Isabel." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Roberto Oliveira had abandoned the family 2 years before, when depression and alcoholism took over his life after he lost his job. Isabel had grown up believing that her father was gone forever. "How did he know where we are?" Jason asked. "Apparently someone told him about the situation. He said he's been sober for 6 months and participating in a rehabilitation program. He wants a chance to meet his daughter." "And you? Do you want to give him that chance?" Vanessa asked. Carmela sat heavily in a chair. "I don't know. On one hand, Isabel should know her father. On the other, I'm afraid he'll disappoint her again. Or worse, that he'll want to take her away from all this stability we've built." "Where is he now?" Jason asked. "At a hotel downtown. He said he'll stay for a few days, waiting for our answer." That night, after Isabel had fallen asleep, the adults gathered to discuss the situation. Roberto's arrival complicated everything. Legally, he had rights to his daughter, but morally, his absence during the most difficult moments of Isabel's life raised questions about his true intentions. "We need to think about what's best for Isabel," Mrs. Davis said. "Not what's most convenient for us." "I agree," Donald said. "But a child who has already suffered so much abandonment needs stability, not more uncertainties." "What if he really has changed?" Vanessa asked. "What if this is Isabel's moment to have a complete family? Or if he came after her because he found out she's living with a wealthy family?" Jason countered with cynicism. It was Carmela who made the decision. "I'm going to meet with him first, alone. I want to look him in the eyes and see if the man I fell in love with still exists, or if all that's left is addiction and despair. The next day, Carmela left for her meeting with Roberto while Isabel played in the garden, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Jason tried to focus on work, but his mind was constantly turned to the possible consequences of that meeting. When Carmela returned 3 hours later, her face was wet with tears, but there was something different in her expression, a mixture of hope and fear that the others couldn't interpret. "How did it go?" Vanessa asked gently. "He's changed," Carmela said, sitting down in the living room. "He's clean, sober, working in a mechanic shop. He said he lost everything because of the drink, but that hitting rock bottom forced him to seek help." "And what exactly does he want?" Jason asked. "He wants to be our daughter's father. He doesn't want to take her away. He understands that she's fine here with us, but he wants the right to visit her, to be part of her life." "How do you feel about that?" Mrs. Davis asked. Carmela hesitated before answering. "Part of me still loves him. Part of me hates what he put us through. But when I looked into his eyes today, I saw the man I married, not the monster he turned into." "What if he goes back to drinking?" Donald asked with practical concern. "He offered to take regular sobriety tests. He said he understands that he needs to prove he's changed, not just say he's changed." That night during dinner, Isabel asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Why are you all sad today?" The adults looked at each other, realizing that they had underestimated the girl's perception. "We're not sad, dear," Vanessa said. "We're thinking about important things." "What kind of things?" Jason made a decision. "Isabel, do you remember your daddy?" The girl stopped eating and was quiet for a moment. "A little. He was tall and had a mustache, and sometimes he got very angry for no reason. What if I told you he wants to meet you again?" Isabel's eyes widened. "Is he here?" "He's in town," Carmela confirmed carefully, "and he would really like to see how you've grown." "He won't get angry anymore?" she asked with a concern that broke everyone's heart. "He promised he won't," Carmela said. "He said he learned not to get angry for no reason." Isabel considered this for a long moment. "I can meet him, but I don't have to go live with him, do I?" "Never," Vanessa promised immediately. "You'll always have a place here with us, no matter what happens." "Then okay," Isabel said, returning to her meal. "I can meet my daddy." The simplicity of the child's response contrasted dramatically with the emotional complexity the adults were facing. But it also revealed an early wisdom. Isabel had learned that love wasn't exclusive, that it was possible to love many people at the same time without diminishing the love for any of them. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday in the garden of the old Victorian house, with all the adults present to support Isabel if she needed it. Roberto arrived punctually, visibly nervous, carrying a small gift wrapped in colorful paper. When Isabel saw him, she stood still for a few seconds, studying the face of the man who was her father. He had lost weight, his hair was graying, but his eyes had a clarity he had lost years ago. "Hi, Princess," he said with a choked voice. "You've grown so much." "Hi," Isabel replied timidly, partially hiding behind Vanessa. "I brought you a gift," Roberto said, extending the package. Isabel looked at Vanessa for approval, took the gift, and carefully opened it. It was a small brown teddy bear, simple but new. "Thank you," she said politely, but without the enthusiasm she showed with gifts from other people. What followed was an hour of hesitant conversation, with Roberto asking questions about Isabel's likes and activities, while she responded with monosyllables, clearly uncomfortable with this stranger who claimed to be her father. When Roberto left, with the promise to return the following week, Isabel turned to Carmela and asked a question that revealed all the complexity of her feelings. "Mommy, why don't I remember loving him?" Isabel's question about not remembering loving her father echoed through the house for days. Carmela struggled with her own guilt, questioning whether she had failed to keep alive the positive memories of Roberto for her daughter. The other adults watched the girl more carefully, looking for signs of confusion or emotional distress that could arise from this complex situation. During the week that followed the first meeting, Roberto established a routine of brief, supervised visits. He always arrived punctually, brought small, simple gifts, a coloring book, some candies, a flower from the hotel garden, and tried desperately to create connections with a daughter who saw him as a gentle stranger, but not as a father. Jason observed these interactions with contradictory feelings. On the one hand, he admired Roberto's determination to try to rebuild the relationship with Isabel. On the other, he felt a pang of jealousy when he saw the girl gradually warming up to the man who had abandoned her, while he, who had saved her from hunger and offered stability, still struggled to find his own place in her life. It was during Roberto's fourth visit that something happened that changed the dynamics of the whole situation. Isabel was showing him her latest drawings when she suddenly stopped at a specific page. "This drawing is from the bad time," she said, pointing to a dark figure she had made weeks ago during her first days in the house. Roberto looked at the drawing, a small child surrounded by dark and menacing shapes, with a large man shouting in the background. "Do you remember the bad time?" he asked carefully. "I remember you shouting at Mommy," Isabel said with brutal frankness, "and you breaking things, and the bad smell you had." The words hit Roberto like physical blows. Carmela, who was listening to the conversation from the porch, felt tears running down her face. All the adults present understood at that moment that Isabel's lack of emotional connection with her father was not only a consequence of the time they spent apart, but of the traumatic final memories she had of him. "I was a very sick person back then," Roberto said, his voice trembling, "and I did terrible things that a child should never have seen." "Why did you get sick?" Isabel asked with the natural curiosity of a child. Roberto looked at Carmela, who nodded, encouraging him to be honest within appropriate limits. "When I lost my job, I got very sad and scared, and I started drinking a drink that makes people angry and do bad things. Like the medicine that makes people sleepy, but the opposite," Isabel tried to understand. "Similar, yes, but a bad medicine that instead of helping only made everything worse." Isabel considered this for a moment. "And now you don't take the bad medicine anymore?" "No. I learned that it was better to be sad without the bad medicine than to be angry with it." The conversation marked a turning point in the relationship between father and daughter. It didn't create instant love, but it established a foundation of honesty that allowed Isabel to begin to distinguish between the sick father who had frightened her and the man who was trying to redeem himself before her. In the following weeks, Roberto proved his consistency by showing up for each scheduled visit, always sober, always respectful of the limits set by the family. Gradually, Isabel began to show more interest in his stories, especially when he told about his poor but happy childhood, or about how he had met Carmela. It was during one of those conversations that Mrs. Davis made a discovery that would change everything again. She was organizing some old papers when she found a letter she had kept for decades, a letter that Donald had written to Carmela when she was only 10 years old, but had never delivered. "Donald," she called, entering the garden where he was watering the plants with Isabel. "I need to talk to you about this letter." When Donald saw the yellowed envelope in her hands, his face paled. "Where did you find this?" "In the box of old papers. It's from 1999, addressed to Carmela. Why did you never deliver it?" "Because..." Donald hesitated, looking at Isabel, who was playing nearby. "Because back then I didn't have the courage to admit I was her father." Marlene carefully opened the letter and read aloud. "My dear Carmela, today you turned 10 years old, and I can't hug you or sing happy birthday like a father should. I work in the gardens near your house so I can watch you grow up from afar, but my heart aches every day for not being able to tell you that you are the most important thing in my life. One day, when I have enough courage, I will tell you the truth about who I am. Until then, know that there is a man who loves you more than his own life, even if you don't know who he is." Tears streamed down Donald's face as Marlene read. Carmela, who had appeared attracted by the voices, heard the last words and ran to hug her father. "Daddy," she sobbed, "you never needed to be afraid to tell me. I always knew deep in my heart that you loved me." Isabel watched the scene without fully understanding, but realizing that something important was happening. "Is Grandpa Donald crying?" she asked. "They're tears of joy, my little one," Marlene explained, also moved. "Sometimes adults cry when they get very happy." The discovery of the letter brought a new layer of depth to the family relationships, but also highlighted a disturbing pattern. All the important men in Carmela and Isabel's lives had at some point turned away from them out of fear, weakness, or circumstances beyond their control. That night, during a conversation between Jason and Vanessa in their bedroom, she expressed a concern that had been growing in her heart. "Have you noticed how all the men in her life have failed her in some way?" Vanessa said. "Donald abandoned her out of fear, Roberto abandoned her out of addiction, and even you. Well, you indirectly contributed to the destruction of her family." "What are you getting at?" Jason asked. "I'm getting at the fact that Isabel is learning that men aren't reliable, that eventually everyone will leave or disappoint her." Jason was quiet, processing this observation. "And you think I'll disappoint her too? I think you're the only man in her life who has the power to break that pattern. But you also have the power to confirm it if you're not careful." The responsibility that Vanessa had placed on his shoulders was overwhelming. Jason realized that he wasn't just a temporary protector or a generous benefactor. He had become a crucial father figure in Isabel's emotional development, and his actions would determine how she saw men for the rest of her life. 2 days later, Roberto surprised everyone by arriving for his regular visit, accompanied by a woman. Sandra Oliveira was 40 years old, with short blonde hair and a warm smile that immediately caught Isabel's attention. "This is Sandra," Roberto explained nervously. We've been dating for a few months." The silence that followed was tense. No one had expected Roberto to bring a new person into the already complex family dynamic. "Nice to meet you all," Sandra said, extending her hand to greet each of them. "Roberto talks about Isabel all the time. He said she's a very special girl." Isabel hid behind Vanessa, clearly uncomfortable with yet another change in her life. "Who is she?" she whispered to Vanessa. "She's a friend of your father," Vanessa replied carefully. "Is she going to live with him?" The question, asked with the typical innocence of a child, immediately revealed the implications that the adults were trying to avoid discussing. If Roberto was in a serious relationship, it could drastically affect his future plans regarding Isabel. "Roberto," Carmela said with a controlled but tense voice, "can we talk in private?" What followed was an intense discussion in the office, while Sandra played with Isabel in the garden, under Marlene's watchful supervision. Carmela wanted to know about Roberto's intentions, whether he intended to marry again, whether he planned to start a new family, and above all, where Isabel would fit into all these plans. "Sandra knows about Isabel from the beginning," Roberto explained. "She has 2 daughters from a previous marriage and understands the complexity of the situation." "And what do you intend to do?" Jason asked directly. "For now, nothing," Roberto replied. "I'm focused on rebuilding my relationship with Isabel. Everything else can wait." But the words "for now" echoed in everyone's minds like a veiled threat. The stability they had carefully built was once again at risk, and this time there was no clear villain to combat, only the natural complexity of life and human relationships. The presence of Sandra in Roberto's life brought a completely new dynamic to the already complex web of relationships that surrounded Isabel. In the following weeks, it became clear that Sandra wasn't just a casual girlfriend. She genuinely cared about Roberto and showed a sincere interest in getting to know Isabel. Paradoxically, This made the situation even more complicated for everyone involved. During the visits, Sandra was patient and attentive to Isabel, bringing children's books that her own daughters had enjoyed and telling funny stories that made the girl laugh. Gradually, Isabel began to feel more comfortable with her, but this created a new fear in the hearts of Jason and Vanessa. If Isabel became fond of Sandra too, this could strengthen the ties that connected her back to Roberto's life. It was during a nighttime conversation between Vanessa and Carmela that this fear was verbalized for the first time. The two women were in the kitchen, preparing cookies for Isabel, when Vanessa finally said what they were all thinking. "Do you think Roberto is planning to ask for Isabel back?" she asked, kneading the dough harder than necessary. Carmela stopped stirring the mixture and sighed deeply. "I don't know. Part of me hopes not, because she's so happy here, but another part of me, well, he's her father. But being a father isn't just about biology," Vanessa argued. "It's about being present, about building memories, about being consistent. And you've done all that for her," Carmela admitted. "Sometimes I feel guilty about that." "Guilty about what?" "For living in a beautiful house, earning a good salary, seeing my daughter receive a quality education, while my own mother worked her whole life in bad jobs and never had any of that." Vanessa stopped working and looked at Carmela. "Carmela, you know you deserve all this, right? You're a hard-working, honest woman, a wonderful mother. The fact that you didn't have opportunities before doesn't mean you don't deserve to have them now." "Sometimes I don't feel worthy," Carmela confessed. "And I'm afraid that Roberto will come up with arguments about how Isabel should grow up with people from our own social class, in our own reality." It was at that moment that Jason entered the kitchen, looking for a glass of water, and overheard the end of the conversation. "Carmela," he said gently, "can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "If you could choose any future for Isabel without worrying about money, social status, or what other people would think, what would your choice be?" Carmela thought carefully before answering. "I would choose that she grow up in an environment where she is loved unconditionally, where her talents are recognized and developed, where she feels safe and valued every day." "And where does she have that now?" Jason insisted. "Here," Carmela admitted, tears in her eyes. "She has all of that here with you. So, why do you feel guilty for wanting the best for your daughter?" The conversation was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Roberto, who knocked on the back door of the old Victorian house. It was later than his usual visits, and he seemed agitated. "Sorry to show up unannounced," he said when Carmela opened the door. "But I need to talk to you about something urgent." Everyone gathered in the living room, including Marlene and Donald, who had been called in for the conversation. Isabel was asleep, thankfully oblivious to the drama unfolding among the adults. "Sandra and I are planning to get married," Roberto announced bluntly, "and she wants to move to Atlanta, where she has a better job opportunity." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone processed the implications of that statement. If Roberto moved to Atlanta, it could mean the end of his regular visits, or worse, a legal battle for Isabel's custody. "What does this mean for Isabel?" Vanessa asked directly. "It means I need to make a very difficult decision," Roberto replied. "I can try to convince Sandra to stay here, which wouldn't be fair to her or her daughters. I can leave and continue to be an absent father. Or, Jason pressed, "or I can ask to take Isabel with us to Atlanta." The bomb had exploded. Carmela paled, Vanessa felt the world spin around her, and Jason struggled to control the anger that surged instantly in his chest. "You can't be serious," Marlene said, breaking her usual silence in family conflicts. "I'm very serious," Roberto replied. "Isabel is my daughter. I'm sober, working, in a stable relationship. Legally, I have rights. And morally?" Donald asked with a voice full of disapproval. "Morally, you have the right to tear a child away from the only stable home she's ever known." "She can have stability with us too," Roberto argued. "Sandra has experience with children. I'm working in a shop that pays well. We could give her a good life. But not the life she has here, Jason said, trying to keep his voice controlled. Not the specialized education she needs to develop her talents. Not the emotional security we've built together. You've built, Roberto corrected. I wasn't part of that construction because you didn't let me. We didn't let you, Carmela protested. You had weeks to rebuild a relationship with her. No one stopped you. But always as a visitor, never as a real father, always under supervision, always with rules imposed by you. The discussion was intensifying when a small, sleepy voice interrupted everyone. Why are you shouting? Isabel was standing in the doorway of the living room, in her pajamas and disheveled hair, rubbing her eyes. Everyone realized they had been louder than they intended. Sorry, honey, Vanessa said immediately, opening her arms to her. We didn't mean to wake you. Are you fighting because of me? Isabel asked with the frighteningly sharp perception of children. We're not fighting, Carmela lied. Oh, we're just talking about adult things. Isabel looked from one face to another, seeing clearly through the well-intentioned lie. Is it about my dad wanting to take me away? The silence that followed confirmed her suspicions. Isabel broke away from Vanessa's arms and walked to Roberto, looking him directly in the eyes. Do you want to take me away from my family? She asked, with a seriousness that was disturbing for a 4-year-old. Roberto knelt down to be at her height. Isabel, I want you to be my real daughter. I want to take care of you, take you to school, teach you things. But Uncle Jason already does that, she said simply, and Aunt Vanessa helps me with homework, and Grandma Marlene makes cookies with me, and Grandpa Donald teaches me about flowers. I know, Princess, but I'm your real father. Isabel considered this for a long moment. Then, with the brutal honesty of children, she said, But I don't want to go away. I like my life here. Isabel's words echoed through the room like a final sentence. Roberto felt his eyes fill with tears, realizing that he had lost something precious that he might never be able to recover, the heart of his own daughter. What if I stayed here? He asked desperately. What if I told Sandra that I can't move? But then she would be sad, Isabel said, showing impressive empathy. And you would be sad for not marrying her. So what do you think I should do? Isabel thought carefully, with the seriousness of someone much older. I think you should be happy with Sandra. And I'm going to be happy here. And you can visit me whenever you want. Even if I live far away? Even if you live far away. Because now I know that you love me, even when you're not here. That night, after Roberto left to think about the conversation with Isabel, the family gathered to process everything that had happened. There was a sense of victory, but also of melancholy. Roberto wasn't a villain, just a man trying to rebuild his life and find his place as a father. She's growing up so fast, Marlene commented, watching Isabel sleep peacefully in her room. Sometimes I forget she's only 4 years old. Suffering has forced her to mature early, Vanessa said sadly. No child should have to make such complex emotional decisions. But she made the right decision, Jason said, for everyone involved. What they didn't know was that Isabel's decision had planted a seed that would blossom in an unexpected way, bringing a final twist that no one could have foreseen. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating conversation with Roberto, and life in the Sterling mansion had returned to an apparent normalcy. Roberto continued his visits, but now there was a melancholic acceptance that his role in Isabel's life would always be limited. Sandra was understanding of the situation, but it was evident that the move to Atlanta would happen, with or without Isabel. It was during a rainy October morning that news arrived that no one expected. Teresa Andrade, the auditor who had helped Jason expose Marcus, appeared at the mansion with an urgent expression on her face and a folder full of documents under her arm. I need to talk to you immediately, she said to Jason. It's about the investigations I continued to do after the Marcus case. Jason led her to the office, where Teresa spread documents on the table with trembling hands. "Jason, you need to see this. What I discovered is going to change everything." "What is it about?" he asked, examining the papers. "Remember when you said you felt guilty about closing Metaltech even after discovering that Marcus had falsified the numbers? Well, I continued investigating other subsidiaries, other suspicious operations." "And what did you find?" Teresa pointed to a specific report. "I found evidence that Metaltech didn't need to close. In fact, if Marcus hadn't diverted the resources and sabotaged the contracts, the factory not only would have survived, but it would have become one of the most profitable units in your company." Jason felt his stomach clench. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Marcus didn't just defraud the company. He deliberately destroyed a healthy operation. And you know why? Why? Because he had a secret agreement with the competition. Megacorp Industrial was planning to build a new factory in the area, but needed Metaltech out of the market first. Marcus was paid to ensure that happened." The revelation struck Jason like lightning. How much was he paid? $2 million, deposited in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Jason sank into his chair, processing the implications. That means 300 families lost their jobs not out of economic necessity, not out of restructuring, but out of pure and simple sabotage. Marcus sold these people's futures for dirty money. "Are you sure about this information?" "Absolutely, and there's more." Teresa turned some pages. "Megacorp never built the promised factory. They simply wanted to eliminate the competition. After Metaltech closed, they raised prices by 30% and dominated the regional market." Jason was silent for a long time, digesting the magnitude of the betrayal. Not only had Marcus stolen from his company, but he had orchestrated a conspiracy that destroyed hundreds of lives out of pure greed. "Teresa, you need to take this information to the authorities," he said finally. "I already have. Marcus was arrested this morning. And there's more. Megacorp is also being investigated for anti-competitive practices. And what does that change for the families who were harmed? It changes everything. With this evidence, you can sue both Marcus and Megacorp for damages. The damage awards could be much larger than what you initially paid." That afternoon, Jason gathered the family to share the discovery. The revelation that the destruction of Metaltech had been a premeditated criminal act brought a mixture of relief and anger to everyone. "That means you were never guilty of anything," Vanessa said, holding his hand. "You were a victim, just like all those families." "But I still feel responsible," Jason admitted. "I should have paid more attention. I should have investigated more thoroughly before authorizing the closure." "You trusted someone who betrayed that trust," Carmela said. "That doesn't make you guilty. It makes you human." It was Isabel who made the observation that changed everyone's perspective. "Uncle Jason, if the bad man hadn't closed my dad's factory, you would never have found me on the street." The simplicity of the observation revealed a profound truth. Sometimes even the most painful tragedies can lead to encounters that change lives for the better. If Roberto hadn't lost his job, if the family hadn't fallen apart, if Isabel hadn't ended up on the streets, they never would have met. "It's true," Jason said, picking her up. "Sometimes bad things happen because of bad people, but good things can grow even from the most difficult situation." 2 weeks later, Roberto's life took an unexpected turn. Sandra had accepted the job offer in Atlanta and was pushing for a date for the move. Roberto found himself between choosing the woman he loved or staying close to the daughter he barely knew, but was finally learning to love. It was during one of his visits that he made a decision that surprised everyone. He arrived at the mansion with a determined expression and asked to speak to the whole family. "I've made my decision," he announced. "I'm going to Atlanta with Sandra." Carmela felt a mixture of relief and sadness. "What about Isabel?" "Isabel has a family here. A real family who loves and cares for her better than I ever could. He knelt in front of his daughter. Princess, you were right that night. I should be happy with Sandra, and you should be happy here. But you're still going to be my dad? Isabel asked. I'll always be your dad. But now I understand that being a father doesn't mean being physically present every day. It means wanting the best for you, even when it means letting other people take care of you better than I could. Are you going to call me? She asked. Every week, and I'll come visit whenever I can. And when you grow up, you can come visit me in Atlanta if you want. Okay, Isabel said, hugging him. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Princess. More than you can imagine. Roberto's farewell was emotional, but it also brought a sense of closure to everyone. He had found his redemption not by trying to force a place in Isabel's life, but by recognizing where she truly belonged. A week after Roberto's departure, something happened that definitively consolidated the new family. Jason was in his office, reviewing the contracts for the lawsuit against Marcus and Megacorp, when Vanessa entered with a radiant expression on her face. Jason, she said, barely able to contain her emotion, I need to tell you something. What is it? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air for a moment. After 2 years of trying to get pregnant, after all the pain and frustration, Vanessa was finally expecting the child she had so longed for. Are you sure? He asked, getting up to hug her. Absolutely. I took 3 different tests. They hugged in silence, processing the magnitude of that news. But then Jason had a sudden concern. And Isabel? How will she react? I don't know, Vanessa admitted. But I hope she'll be happy with the idea of having a little brother or sister. When they told Isabel the news that night, her reaction was typical of a 4-year-old, immediate and direct. I'm going to be a big sister? She asked, her eyes shining with excitement. You are, Jason confirmed. And is the baby going to live here with us? It is, Vanessa said. Then I'm going to teach it how to draw birdies, Isabel exclaimed, already planning the future with her new sibling. That night, as they put Isabel to bed, she asked a question that revealed the depth of her understanding of family. Aunt Vanessa, even when the baby is born, are you still going to love me the same? Even more, Vanessa promised, kissing her forehead. Because our heart doesn't shrink when it loves more people. It grows. Like a family? Isabel asked. Exactly like a family. And so, the family that had begun with an act of compassion on a Savannah street continued to grow, proving that sometimes the best blessings come disguised as challenges, and that true love knows no boundaries of blood, social class, or circumstances. The months that followed Vanessa's pregnancy announcement brought an atmosphere of expectation and renewal to the Sterling mansion. Isabel became the most dedicated older sister one could imagine, constantly talking to Vanessa's growing belly, singing lullabies she had learned from Marlene, and drawing colorful gifts for the baby who was to come. The lawsuit against Marcus and Megacorp was progressing favorably. Teresa continued to provide devastating evidence, and Jason's lawyers estimated that the final damage awards could reach $15 million, resources that he had already decided to allocate entirely to the harmed families and to the creation of an educational fund for underprivileged children in the area. You're going to give it all away? Vanessa asked one night when he explained his plans for the damage money. Every penny, he confirmed. That money was born from the suffering of other people. It wouldn't be right to use it for our personal benefit, even knowing that we're going to have another child to raise. Jason looked out the window of the room where Isabel was playing in the garden with Donald, her laughter echoing through the afternoon. Val, I have enough wealth to provide a comfortable life for our children for several generations. What I don't have a price on is peace of mind. It was during one of these conversations about justice and reparation that unexpected news arrived. Roberto called from Atlanta with an emotional voice, telling them that Sandra had also become pregnant. and that they were planning the wedding for 2 months from now. "I want Isabel to be my flower girl," he said during the video call. "If you allow it, of course." Isabel, who was participating in the conversation, was radiant with the prospect. "Can I, Uncle Jason? Can I be Daddy's flower girl?" "Of course you can," Jason replied, realizing how the girl had naturally found a way to love both her biological father and the family that was raising her. "And you're also invited to the wedding," Roberto added. "Sandra insists on getting to know better the people who take such good care of Isabel." The prospect of the trip to Atlanta created a stir in the house. It would be the first time Isabel had left Savannah, and also the first family trip they would all take together. While preparations for the trip were underway, Donald made an announcement that surprised everyone. At 67 years old, he had decided to retire from his job as the Vasconcelos gardener to dedicate himself entirely to the garden of the Sterling mansion. "I want to spend more time with my granddaughter before she gets too old to learn about plants," he said to Carmela, "and this place has become more my home than any other place I've ever lived." "Dad, are you sure? The Vasconcelos pay better." "Daughter, some jobs are about money, others are about heart. I want Isabel to grow up knowing that her grandfather was present in her life." Donald's decision consolidated something that everyone felt, but no one had verbalized. They were no longer just a family of circumstances, but a chosen family, united by bonds that transcended blood or convenience. It was during the preparations for the trip that the event happened that would change everything once again. Vanessa was in her 6th month of pregnancy when she began to feel strange pains one December morning. Initially, she tried to ignore them, thinking they were just normal discomforts of gestation. But when the pains intensified, Jason insisted on taking her to the hospital. Dr. Fernando Santos, the obstetrician who was monitoring Vanessa, examined her with an increasingly worried expression. After a series of tests, he called Jason for a private conversation. "There are complications," he said directly. "The placenta is detaching prematurely. We need to do an emergency C-section right now, or we may lose both the mother and the baby." Jason's world crumbled at that moment. "But she's only in her 6th month. Babies born at this age have good chances of survival with proper intensive care. But if we wait any longer, the chances decrease dramatically for both." While Vanessa was being prepared for emergency surgery, Jason called home to explain the situation. Marlene took control, reassuring Isabel and organizing everyone to go to the hospital. "Is the baby going to be okay?" Isabel asked, with her big eyes full of concern. "Let's hope so, my dear," Marlene replied, hugging her. The surgery lasted 3 agonizing hours. Jason walked through the hospital corridors like a caged lion, while the rest of the family waited in the waiting room. Carmela prayed softly, Donald held Isabel's hand tightly, and Marlene tried to keep everyone calm. When Dr. Fernando finally appeared, still wearing his surgical scrubs, his tired face carried mixed news. "Vanessa is fine," he said. "The surgery was a success, and she is recovering." "And the baby?" Jason asked with a trembling voice. "It's a girl. She's alive but needs intensive care. She was born weighing only 2 pounds and 10 ounces. The next few weeks will be critical." Isabel broke away from Donald's hand and ran to Jason. "It's a girl? I have a little sister?" "You do," he said, picking her up with tears in his eyes. "You have a very small little sister who needs a lot of love and care to grow strong. Can I see her?" "Soon, little one. She's in a special place in the hospital where doctors take care of premature babies." When they were finally able to see little Sophia, the name that Vanessa had chosen during the pregnancy, everyone was moved. The baby was tiny, connected to various equipment, but she was breathing on her own and had the same green eyes as Jason. "She's so tiny," Isabel murmured, pressing her face against the glass of the NICU. "She looks like a little doll. She's going to grow," Vanessa promised, who had been brought in a wheelchair to see her daughter. "And when she grows up, you're going to teach her everything. I'm going to teach her to draw, to sing, to play in the garden with Grandpa Donald," Isabel said, already planning the future with her sister. The following weeks tested the emotional endurance of the entire family. Sophia remained hospitalized, going through critical moments that made everyone fear the worst, but also showing an impressive willpower that was very reminiscent of Isabel's resilience. Jason divided his time between the hospital, the company, and the house, trying to be strong for everyone but fighting against his own fears. His investments in funds and stock dividends continued to yield returns, ensuring that they had the resources for any necessary treatment, but the money seemed irrelevant in the face of the fragility of life. It was during one of these hospital vigils that something unexpected happened. A nurse approached Jason and Vanessa with a confused expression. "Sorry to bother you," she said, "but there's a gentleman outside who insists on talking to you. He said he knows the family and has important information about your older child." Jason frowned. "What kind of information?" "He wouldn't say. He just insisted that it was urgent and that you would want to hear what he has to say." Leaving Vanessa with Sophia, Jason went out to meet the mysterious visitor. On the other side of the corridor, an elderly man of simple appearance was waiting nervously. "Mr. Sterling?" the man asked. "My name is John Carlos Ferreira. I need to talk to you about Isabel." "What about Isabel?" Jason asked, immediately alert. "About who she really is, and about a secret that your family has kept for a long time." The man opened an old folder and took out some yellow documents. "Sir, Isabel isn't just a girl you saved from the street. She's my great-granddaughter, and there's a considerable inheritance that belongs to her." Jason felt the ground move beneath his feet. After so many twists and turns, after thinking they had finally found stability, a new mystery was emerging, promising to change the destiny of all of them once again. "What kind of inheritance?" he asked, fearing the answer. "A property in the countryside, some investments in gold that my father left, and mainly," the man paused dramatically, "information about the true identity of Carmela's biological father." The final revelation was about to happen, and Jason realized that the story of his family was far from over. John Carlos Ferreira's words echoed through the hospital corridor like a bomb that was about to explode. Jason looked at the elderly man, trying to process the magnitude of what he had just heard. After months of twists and turns and discoveries, when they thought they had finally found peace, a new mystery was emerging from the shadows of the past. "Mr. Ferreira," Jason said carefully, "you need to be more specific. What kind of information about Carmela's father?" John Carlos took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he organized the old documents. "My son, Anthony Carlos Ferreira, had a relationship with a young woman about 25 years ago. She became pregnant, but he left to work in the gold mines of Paracatu before knowing about the pregnancy. And that young woman was Carmela's biological mother. My son never knew he had a daughter until recently, when he began investigating his own family history." Jason felt dizzy. "Where is your son now?" "He passed away 3 years ago, but he left specific instructions for me to find his daughter and granddaughter if something happened to him. He had accumulated a small fortune working in the mines, in addition to rural properties he inherited from my father." "Why have you only come to look for Carmela now?" John Carlos lowered his eyes in shame. "Because it took me time to gather courage. Anthony made me promise that I would only look for the family if they were going through hardship. When I learned about the Metaltech case in the newspapers and saw the name of the Santos Oliveira family among those harmed, I began to investigate." "And how did you find out where we are?" "Ah, Mr. Sterling, in a small town like Savannah, it's not difficult to find out where the wealthiest businessman who adopted a street girl lives. Your story has been talked about for months." Jason leaned back against the hospital wall, trying to absorb all the implications. Carmela had a biological father different from Donald, and Isabel had a great-grandfather she had never known, but who had left her an inheritance. How much are we talking about in terms of inheritance?" he asked. "About $300,000 in investments, a 50-acre property in the countryside, and some ounces of gold that my father buried during the hard times. In total, maybe $500,000. For a family that had lived in extreme poverty, $500,000 represented a complete life change. But for Jason, who had learned that money without family had no value, the issue was more complex. "Mr. Ferreira, what exactly do you want from us?" "I want to meet my great-granddaughter," the man said with tears in his eyes, "and I want to hand over the inheritance that belongs to her by right. My son always regretted not having looked for Carmela. He said that if he had met his daughter, maybe his life would have been different. Do you have any family?" "No. My wife passed away 10 years ago, and Anthony was my only son. Isabel is all that's left of my lineage." At that moment, Jason made a decision that would define the future of all of them. "Mr. Ferreira, would you like to meet your great-granddaughter now? She's here at the hospital visiting her newborn little sister." The elderly man's eyes filled with tears. Can I?" "You can. But first, let's talk to Carmela. She has the right to know about her real father before anything else." When Jason returned to the room, he found the whole family gathered around Vanessa, who was holding Sophia in her arms for the first time. The baby had finally grown enough to leave the incubator, now weighing 5.5 pounds. "Jason," Vanessa said with a radiant smile. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "And she's beautiful," added Isabel, gently touching her sister's little hand. "Can I hold her?" "Very carefully," Vanessa said, helping Isabel position her arms correctly. Jason watched the scene, his family finally complete and happy, and hesitated to interrupt that perfect moment with yet another twist. But he knew that the truth, however complex, was always preferable to secrets. "Everyone," he said gently, "there's someone here at the hospital who needs to talk to us, especially with you, Carmela." When John Carlos entered the room, there was total silence. Carmela looked at the elderly man with curiosity, without recognizing him. "Carmela," John Carlos began with a choked voice, "my name is John Carlos Ferreira, and I'm your grandfather." "My grandfather?" repeated Carmela, confused. "But my father is Donald." "Donald is the wonderful man who raised you with love," John Carlos corrected, "but your biological father was my son, Anthony, and he never knew you existed." What followed was a long and emotional conversation, where John Carlos told the story of Anthony, a young miner who had left to work in Paracatu, promising to return to marry his girlfriend, but who never returned because he didn't know she was pregnant when he left. "He spent his whole life wondering what had happened to that young woman," said John Carlos, "and when he finally tried to look for her, he found out that she had left shortly after giving you up for adoption. He spent years looking for you both." Donald, who had heard everything in silence, finally spoke up. "This doesn't change anything between us," he said to Carmela. "You will always be my daughter, no matter who brought you into the world." "I know, Dad," said Carmela, hugging Donald, "but it's good to know the whole truth." Isabel, who had handed Sophia back to Vanessa, approached John Carlos with her natural curiosity. "So you're my great-grandfather?" "I am, my dear," said John Carlos, kneeling to be at her height, "and you're more beautiful than I imagined." "Do you have presents?" Isabel asked with the typical frankness of children. John Carlos laughed through his tears. "I do. I have an inheritance that your great-grandfather Anthony left especially for you." "What kind of inheritance?" "A farm with lots of animals, a buried treasure, and enough money for you to study at the best schools in the world." Isabel considered this for a moment. "But I already have a family that loves me and a pretty house. Can I keep the inheritance and continue living here?" The innocent question of the girl revealed the wisdom she had developed through all the difficulties she had faced. She had learned that home wasn't about place or money, but about people who cared about you. "Of course you can," Jason said. "The inheritance is yours, but you can decide how to use it." "Then I want to use it to help other children like I was before," Isabel said without hesitation. "Children who don't have a family." John Carlos looked at that 4-year-old girl who spoke with the wisdom of someone much older and understood that Anthony's true inheritance wasn't the money or the properties, but an extraordinary great-granddaughter who had learned the real value of compassion and generosity. 6 months later, the family had grown and transformed once again. Sophia was healthy and growing rapidly, filling the mansion with her laughter and babbling. Isabel had proven to be a dedicated older sister, always willing to help with the baby and to teach her everything she knew. The property inherited from Anthony was transformed into an educational center for underprivileged children, funded by the resources of the inheritance and by the growing dividends of Jason's investments. Isabel, now 5 years old, visited the center regularly, helping other children with her early talents in math and art. Roberto had married Sandra in Atlanta and had become the father of a boy, sending photos and keeping in regular contact with Isabel through weekly video calls. The relationship between them had found a healthy balance. Him as a biological father who loved from a distance, her as a daughter who had found her true home. John Carlos had moved into a small apartment near the mansion, becoming the present great-grandfather that Anthony could never be. He and Donald developed a friendship based on the common love they felt for Carmela and Isabel. Marcus had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud and corruption, and Megacorp had paid million-dollar damages that Jason had allocated entirely to the harmed families. Many of these families used the money to start their lives over, and some even sent thank-you cards to Isabel, the girl who had inadvertently exposed the injustice they had suffered. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, the whole family was gathered in the garden of the mansion. Isabel played with Sophia on the lawn, teaching her 1-year-old sister to recognize different types of flowers. Vanessa and Carmela chatted on the porch while preparing the afternoon snack. Donald and John Carlos worked together in a new section of the garden. Marlene watched everything from the kitchen with a smile of satisfaction from someone who saw her family grow so beautifully. Jason contemplated the scene, reflecting on how his life had completely changed since that afternoon when he saw a little girl lose her piece of bread on the street. His investments continued to yield well, his bitcoins had appreciated significantly, and his wealth in euros and dollars grew steadily, but none of that compared to the wealth he had found in the family that had formed around him. "Uncle Jason," called Isabel, running to him. Sophia said her first word. "And what was it?" he asked, picking up both girls. "Dora," said Isabel proudly. "She tried to say my name." As the whole family gathered to hear Sophia try to repeat her older sister's name, Jason realized that he had found something that no fortune could buy. A family united by love, strengthened by difficulties, and enriched by the diversity of its origins. The girl he had found on the street, hungry and abandoned, had transformed into a bright, compassionate child, loved by everyone around her. And by saving her, she had saved them all, teaching them that true wealth was not in financial assets or profitable investments, but in the ability to love and be loved, to protect and be protected, to grow and help others grow. As the sun set over Savannah, painting the sky with golden tones that rivaled any treasure, Jason knew that he had found his true purpose, not only as a successful businessman, but as a father, husband, and protector of a family he had chosen to build with love, patience, and unconditional dedication. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.